It all started on an ordinary Tuesday evening. After a long day at work, I was finally back home, sitting on my worn-out couch with my laptop balanced on my knees. It had become a bit of a routine for me, unwind or take out and spend a few hours chatting with Emma, a girl I'd met online. We had hit it off immediately, and our conversations were always fun and lively. That night, Emma and I were laughing over silly memes and discussing random topics. Somewhere in the middle of our banter, the conversation took a playful turn. We began sending each other goofy selfies, at first innocent, then a bit more flirtatious. It was harmless fun, nothing too serious. At least, that's what I thought. Eventually, Emma dared me to send a bolder photo. I hesitated for a moment, but I figured it was all in good humor. So I took a quick selfie, added a cheeky caption, and hit send. But as soon as I tapped the screen, a sinking feeling gripped me. My heart stopped. I realized too late that I hadn't sent the photo to Emma. Instead, it had gone to someone else. My boss, Rachel. Rachel wasn't just any boss. She was sharp, confident, and had a commanding presence that made everyone at the office sit up straight when she entered a room. She wasn't harsh or rude, quite the opposite, but she was someone you didn't want to cross. And now, I had sent that kind of photo to her by mistake. At first, I thought maybe I could fix it. I quickly opened the chat, panicking, and tried to delete the message. My fingers fumbled as I rushed through the options, but instead of choosing delete for everyone, I accidentally selected delete for me. The photo was still sitting in Rachel's inbox. I sat there frozen, staring at the screen, my mind racing through a dozen scenarios. Would she fire me on the spot? Would she report me to HR? The thought of showing up to work the next day made my stomach churn. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, hoping she wouldn't see the message. But then my phone buzzed. It was her. I hesitated, my hands trembling as I opened the notification. Her reply was short, a single winking emoji. I stared at it, completely dumbfounded. Was she joking? Was she mocking me? Or was it something else entirely? I had no idea what to think. I wanted to apologize, to explain, but I didn't know how to approach it without making things worse. That night, sleep was impossible. I kept replaying the moment in my head, trying to figure out what to do. Should I address it directly, pretend it never happened, quit my job, and move to another state? The next morning, I woke up feeling like a zombie. As I got ready for work, I mentally prepared myself for the worst. By the time I arrived at the office, my nerves were completely shot. Rachel wasn't in her office when I first walked in. A part of me was relieved, but I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. When she finally showed up, I could feel her eyes on me from across the room. I avoided making eye contact and tried to keep my head down, burying myself in emails and reports. Throughout the day, I caught glimpses of her smiling at me, but it wasn't the usual polite smile she gave everyone. It was something different, almost teasing. Every time our paths crossed, I felt my cheeks flush, and my heartbeat quickened. By the time the day ended, I was mentally exhausted. I had spent the entire day avoiding her, replaying her winking emoji in my head, and overthinking every interaction. When I finally made it home that evening, I let out a long sigh of relief, happy to put the day behind me. But just as I sat down to relax, my phone buzzed again. It was another message from Rachel. My hand shook as I opened it. I wouldn't mind if you sent another photo like that. The message read. I blinked, rereading it several times to make sure I wasn't imagining things. My heart raced. Was this a joke? A trap? Or something else entirely? I didn't know how to respond. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as 1,000 thoughts raced through my head. Finally, I typed, "I'm so sorry about that photo. It was an accident, and I didn't mean for it to happen." A moment later, she replied, "Your photo really surprised me, but I'd like to meet outside of work. Somewhere quiet, maybe a cafe or a park." I stared at the screen, reeling. Rachel, my boss, wanted to meet me outside of work. My first instinct was to decline, to keep things professional. But a part of me was curious. What did she mean by this? What did she want to talk about? After a long pause, I took a deep breath and replied, okay. Little did I know, that one word would change everything. The next day at work felt like a blur. I couldn't shake the thought of Rachel's message. I'd like to meet outside of work. Those words echoed in my mind over and over. I had no idea what she wanted, but one thing was clear, this was not going to be your typical boss-employee relationship anymore. When I first saw Rachel that morning, she had that same subtle smile on her face, mysterious, almost like she knew something I didn't. I was doing everything I could to act normal, but it was impossible. Every time I looked her way, my heart would skip a beat, and I couldn't help but wonder if she remembered the photo. But she was acting like everything was just fine, too fine. During the morning meeting, I was practically in a daze. My thoughts kept drifting to our private conversation, to that emoji she had sent me. I kept sneaking glances at her as she presented her ideas and updates. She seemed confident and in control as always, and yet every time she looked at me, it felt like there was something more to it. When the meeting wrapped up, I couldn't help but feel an unease building up inside me. I had agreed to meet her outside of work, and I had no idea what that was going to mean. But as the clock ticked down to the end of the workday, I knew I couldn't back out now. At exactly 5 p.m., I received a message from Rachel. I'll be waiting at the corner cafe. Don't take too long. I texted her back, saying I was on my way, and headed to the nearby cafe. I tried to prepare myself for whatever was about to happen, but no amount of mental rehearsals could prepare me for the strange feeling that set in my chest. I arrived at the cafe a few minutes early, my nerves getting the best of me. My palms were sweaty, and I had to keep reminding myself to breathe. I was so used to seeing Rachel in the office, where she was the boss, the leader, always calm and collected. But this was different. When Rachel walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She was dressed casually, jeans and a simple top, but she still carried that air of authority, even in such a relaxed outfit. She smiled when she saw me, and I felt a sudden rush of warmth flood through me. Hey, thanks for meeting me, she said, her voice friendly but still carrying that professional tone. I know this is a bit unusual, but I think we should talk about something. I nodded, still unsure of what exactly we were supposed to talk about. We sat down, and as she ordered, coffee. I couldn't stop thinking about the last time I'd seen her in person at the office. I was always trying to impress her with my work, but now, it felt like there was something else at play. She began leaning forward slightly. About the photo, my stomach twisted into knots at the mention of it. I tried to hide my embarrassment, but I couldn't help the flush creeping up my neck. I really didn't mean to send that, I stammered. It was an accident, and I didn't even realize it had gone to you until after I sent it. Rachel's lips curved into a smile, but this time it wasn't a teasing one. It was more understanding. I figured as much, she said, her tone light. But, I was surprised, in a good way. I blinked. Surprised? She shrugged nonchalantly, clearly enjoying the moment. Let's just say it wasn't exactly the kind of photo I expected to receive from one of my employees. But hey, it made me see you in a new light. I was caught off guard. Rachel, my boss, was saying she saw me differently after seeing a private photo of mine? Was she being serious? I wasn't sure if I should feel flattered or embarrassed, so I just nodded awkwardly. The conversation shifted, and Rachel started talking about her thoughts on work, but my mind kept wandering back to her last comment. Was this some kind of joke, a playful challenge, or something else entirely? I couldn't help but wonder. As we continued talking, I felt myself slowly relaxing. Despite the weirdness of the situation, Rachel didn't make me feel uncomfortable. She was professional and friendly, and the more we talked, the more I realized she was someone I could connect with on a deeper level. At some point, Rachel leaned back in her chair, tapping her fingers lightly on the table. I've been thinking about it, and I want to offer you something, she said. My curiosity piqued. I leaned forward slightly. What do you mean? I think you've been doing great work at the office, she continued, and I know we've had our professional moments, but maybe it's time to offer you something a little more personal. I raised an eyebrow. More personal? Rachel smiled, her eyes sparkling with something I couldn't quite place. I'm offering you a chance to be more involved in my projects. I want you to be my assistant. You'll get a raise, more responsibility, and an opportunity to work directly with me. I stared at her, completely taken aback. Did she just offer me a promotion? Are you serious? I asked, barely able to process what she was saying. Rachel's expression softened. Of course. You're dedicated and capable, and I think you do a great job. But I'll be honest, she paused, looking at me with an intensity that made my heart race. I'm also curious to see how you'll handle this. I blinked, still trying to wrap my head around everything. Rachel wasn't just offering me a promotion, she was testing me in some way. It felt like more than just professional development. I couldn't help but ask, why me? She shrugged again, leaning back in her chair. Maybe I just see potential in you, or maybe I'm curious about how far you're willing to go. My mind was racing, but I couldn't deny that I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was more than I had ever expected when I first started working with her. Okay, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'll do it. Rachel smiled, and for the first time I saw her in a new light. This wasn't just my boss anymore. There was something more, something I couldn't quite figure out yet, but I was starting to think that I was about to find out. The following days were a whirlwind of confusion and excitement. After the cafe meeting, I had no idea where things stood between Rachel and me. One minute, she was my boss, the next, she was offering me a promotion. And that photo? It lingered in my mind like a shadow that wouldn't go away. I kept telling myself I had to focus on the work, but every time I saw Rachel, my heart raced a little faster. We worked side by side more often now, and I found myself spending a lot of time in her office, helping with projects, organizing files, and running small errands. The new dynamic was strange. I couldn't quite explain it. There was still the professional air about her, but there was also something else, an undercurrent of something I couldn't name. Rachel didn't treat me any differently, at least not outwardly. She still had that air of authority, the same confidence that made her an excellent boss. But the way she looked at me, the way she smiled at me, had changed. It wasn't just the typical boss-employee relationship anymore. I started to notice little things, like when she'd lean in a bit too close when we talked, or when she'd catch my eye and give me a slight smirk. It was as if there was a secret we were both keeping. But I wasn't the only one who was acting differently. Rachel had started to confide in me more, sharing personal thoughts and opinions she hadn't before. She was still professional, of course, but there was a level of intimacy in our conversations that hadn't existed before. It felt like we were getting to know each other on a deeper level, and I couldn't decide if that was a good or a bad thing. One evening, after we'd finished a long day at the office, I was about to head out when I received another message from Rachel. The notification buzzed on my phone. Hey, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other day. I'd really like to see you again. I'll be home tonight, but I'd love to meet after work. What do you think? My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the message, unsure of what to think. The words were simple, but there was something about them that felt different. It wasn't like any other work-related text I'd ever received from her. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with questions. Was she really serious? Was she just playing around? Did she mean to send this to me? Before I could talk myself out of it, I typed a quick reply, sure, I can meet. What time? A few seconds later, her response came through, 7 p.m. I'll be at the same cafe. Don't keep me waiting. It was official. Rachel wanted to meet me again outside of work, and I had no idea what that was going to mean. But one thing was for sure, I was nervous. I spent the next hour trying to calm my nerves. What was I getting myself into? This was my boss, after all. But at the same time, it didn't feel like that anymore. It felt like something more. Something real. At 7 p.m. sharp, I walked into the cafe, already feeling the anxiety building up in my chest. Rachel was sitting at the same table as before. Her posture was relaxed, but there was a different energy around her. She smiled when she saw me, and for a moment, I almost forgot to breathe. "Hey," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "Thanks for coming." I sat down across from her, still unsure of where this was going. There was a silence between us for a moment, and I could feel the tension building. Then, without missing a beat, Rachel spoke again. "I've been thinking about you," she said. Her voice almost playful. She said, "I think you're someone I'd really like to get to know better." I froze. Did she just say that? Her eyes locked onto mine, and I could feel my face heat up. I didn't know how to respond. Was this a joke? Was she testing me? "Rachel," I started, but she cut me off, holding up her hand. "I know this is unexpected," she said, her tone softening. "But I think we've built up something between us, something that goes beyond just work, something personal." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was my boss, someone I had always respected, someone who had always been in charge. And now she was saying we had something personal? I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. I didn't know whether to be excited, confused, or scared. Rachel leaned back in her chair, her eyes studying me carefully. "I want you to know that this isn't just about the promotion," she said. "This is about what comes after. This is about seeing where this connection takes us, if you're open to it." I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, but my mouth was dry. The only thing I could manage to mutter was, I don't know what to say." Rachel smiled, a small knowing smile that made my heart race. "You don't have to say anything right now," she said gently. "But I'd like to see where this goes. I'd like to explore this with you. No pressure, just, let's see what happens." I was in shock. My boss, who I had always respected and admired, was telling me she wanted something more. She wanted to explore a connection beyond work. But what did that mean for me? What did that mean for my career? And what did it mean for us as two people who were now crossing an invisible line? "Rachel." I trailed off, unsure what to say. She reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Her touch was gentle, but firm. "I'm not asking you to make a decision right now," she said softly. "I just want you to know that I'm interested in seeing where this could go." For the first time in a long time, I felt completely uncertain. But at the same time, I felt something else, something exciting, something thrilling. I think I like that too," I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. Rachel smiled again, her eyes lighting up. "Good. I'm glad." And just like that, everything had changed. The next few days felt like they belonged to a different reality, one I wasn't entirely sure I understood. Rachel and I had crossed a line that, at the time, didn't feel entirely real. I had always respected her as a boss, someone I admired professionally, but now the dynamic had shifted. We were no longer just boss and employee. There was something else, something deeper, forming between us. I spent the following day trying to process everything. The conversation we had at the cafe lingered in my mind. Every time I thought about it, my heart raced. Rachel had made her feelings clear, but I still wasn't sure how to handle it. She was my boss, and as much as I liked the idea of us becoming something more, the consequences of that were hard to ignore. What did it mean for my job? What did it mean for her career? Was this just a moment of impulse, or was there really something genuine between us? I couldn't deny that my feelings for her were growing. The more time I spent with Rachel, the more I wanted to be around her. Every small gesture she made, whether it was the way she smiled at me or the way she took the time to listen when I spoke, made me realize how much I enjoyed her company. It wasn't just physical attraction. It was the connection, the way we could talk for hours without feeling like time had passed at all. But I was still conflicted. The next day at work, things were different. As soon as I entered the office, I felt the tension. Rachel was there as usual, at her desk, typing away, but now there was this unspoken understanding between us. When our eyes met, she gave me that familiar smile, the one that seemed to say so much without uttering a word. I tried to act normal, tried to go about my day as if nothing had changed. But every time I looked away, I caught myself staring. And every time she caught my eye, she would smile, almost as if she was aware of the effect she had on me. It was impossible to ignore. But then something unexpected happened. As the day went on, Rachel asked me to stay late to help her with a project. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, we worked together, and it wasn't unusual for her to ask for help. But this time, there was something different in her tone. It wasn't just about the work. There was a softness in her voice, a warmth that made my stomach flutter. "I'll need your help with this report, but I've been thinking," she began, glancing up from her screen, her eyes meeting mine. "I was wondering if you'd like to join me for dinner after this, just to relax and talk." I felt my heart skip a beat. Rachel, my boss, was asking me to dinner. This was a whole new level of complicated, but I couldn't bring myself to say no. "I'd like that," I said, before I could stop myself. Rachel smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling slightly as she leaned back in her chair. "Great. I'll make reservations. We'll get out of here as soon as we're done." We worked in silence for the next hour, but the anticipation of what would come next hung in the air between us. What would dinner be like? What would it mean for us now that we had started something beyond work? Finally, we packed up and left the office. The moment we stepped out into the cool evening air, it felt like a shift had occurred. We were no longer just colleagues. I felt like I was walking beside someone who saw me in a completely different light, someone who wanted to explore something more, just like I did. At the restaurant, the conversation flowed effortlessly. Rachel was easy to talk to, and she seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me on a personal level. We talked about everything, our hobbies, our families, our dreams. It felt like we were connecting in a way that transcended the professional boundaries we'd once had. "I never thought I'd be in this position," Rachel said halfway through the meal, her voice thoughtful. "I mean, I've always been focused on work, but I can't help but feel like there's something more here with you." I met her gaze, unsure of what to say. "I feel the same," I admitted, my voice a little quieter than usual. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened between us, and I don't know what to make of it. But I can't ignore how I feel." Rachel reached across the table and placed her hand over mine, her touch soft but sure. "We don't have to figure everything out right now," she said. "But I think we're both feeling something real, and I don't want to let that go. Let's just see where this goes. No pressure, no expectations, just see where it leads." I couldn't help but smile. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. We were both on the same page. Whatever happened, we were in this together. As the night went on, I realized something. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know where this relationship was going or what the future held, but I did know that I wanted to be with Rachel. I wanted to explore what we had, even if it meant stepping into uncharted territory. By the end of the evening, Rachel and I parted ways with a simple hug. But it wasn't just any hug. It was a hug that spoke volumes. It was a promise that things between us had changed, and we were both willing to take that chance. The next day at work, I felt a sense of calm. The tension that had plagued me before had dissipated. It wasn't about uncertainty anymore. It was about trust. It was about moving forward together, no matter where it led. And as I looked at Rachel from across the room, I couldn't help but smile. I didn't know what the future held, but I was excited to find out together.